And again, Minister, my question is very specific in relation to the status of the independent review of Part 4 of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017. And I ask this because there was an obligation on you under that Act to carry out an independent review and a report following 3 years of the Act coming into operation. So we're years behind now. We've been given many dates. None of them have been complied with. We were told it was going to be ready in Q3 21, early 22, mid 22, end of 22, and finally sometime this year. So can you please specifically tell me where's the report?
Minister.
No, look, it's a fair question, and I can somewhat share the frustration and have voiced similar frustration as have my colleagues. Look, in July, as the Deputy said, July 2020, Department officials contracted an independent expert to undertake the review of Part 4 of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act. Significant work was completed cataloguing the submissions received under the Part 4 review, which, as you say, was a requirement. But the study lead was also asked to take over another review we were discussing a while ago, the familicide review, after the untimely death of Nora Gibbons, who had been leading that review. As a result, the timeline for completing the Part 4 review was delayed. I can advise the Deputy, as I think I did a moment ago, that the familicide review has now been completed and that final report has been submitted, and as such, the study lead has now been able to turn her attention back to completing the Part 4 review. While the review is independent of the Department, I have been assured that she expects to be in a position to present the outcome of the review very shortly, and I accept you'd like to know what very shortly means, and I can assure you as soon as I have absolute clarity on that, I'd be very happy to share it with the Deputy. I have also instructed my officials to provide additional support to the study lead if needed to assist with the finalisation of the report, while of course respecting fully the independence of the review and the autonomy of the study lead. So I have been in contact with the study lead in relation to the work. I've been assured that it's nearing completion. I've met them directly in relation to this matter. The Deputy is aware a key purpose of the 2017 Sexual Offences Act was to provide additional protection to persons involved in prostitution, especially vulnerable persons and victims of human trafficking. It allows those engaged in prostitution to provide information to the Gardaí, for instance, if they were subjected to violence by clients without fear of prosecution for selling sexual services. Section 27 of the Act provides for the review to which the Deputy's question refers. And as I've already said, my department did commission an independent consultant to undertake the statutory review. I can assure the Deputy, and I want to say this categorically, I am very anxious to receive the report so that consideration can be given to advancing any recommendations needed to further strengthen protection for persons who engage in sexual activity for payment.
Minister.
There was a legal obligation to carry out the review. The terms of reference specifically said that to find out what information there was on the number of arrests and convictions and the impact of the legislation, whether it was actually doing what it said was it supposed to do to protect sex workers on the ground. We've criminalised the purchase of sex. Any of the information that I've read and from reading various reports, it has increased rather than it has decreased the safety aspect in relation to sex workers on the ground. So I have a difficulty here that the obligation, the legal obligation to carry out a review has not been complied with. The information that I see from the various reports, and I might have a chance to come back in my second minute, the various reports from Northern Ireland, from the University of Limerick, from the Amnesty International report, all suggest that sex workers have been more endangered by what has happened. In relation to Northern Ireland, just given the prevalence of the consequences of what's happened in terms of their legislation. I'm conscious. I'll come back in on the second minute. Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, no, and I want to absolutely assure the Deputy that the legal obligation to carry out a review of this was taken extraordinarily seriously by my department, was commissioned, an independent expert put in place. I have outlined to the House, while sharing your frustration, the reasons why a delay has been experienced and the additional efforts my department has been made to ensure that that can be brought to a conclusion as quickly as possible. I am as anxious to receive this as the Deputy is, and I do note her frustration. While it was for the expert to design the precise methodologies for engaging with stakeholders as part of the review, the terms of reference did explicitly confirm that the participation and inclusion of persons engaged in prostitution and persons who have been victims of human trafficking need to be sought, and this was to ensure, to the Deputy's point, that the voices of those with lived experiences would be heard. An online survey was used as part of the public consultation process. Written submissions were invited from individuals and stakeholders, and whilst the review is being conducted independent of the department did not review any submissions received or participate in any of the engagements. So the terms of reference are there in relation to the department, in relation to the review rather. As the Deputy is aware, Part 4 of the Sexual Offences Act did introduce 2 new offences, paying for sexual activity with a prostitute and paying for sexual activity with a trafficked person.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Connolly.
Minister, I'm not sure. I had the privilege of getting the reply when I was in the chair, and it doesn't quite set out what you're setting out. So I'd appreciate if you could clarify in writing what you're telling me in terms of how this was waylaid to do something else. This report was to be completed in 3 months. July 20, so 3 months later it wasn't done. Then 21, then 22, and we're now into 23. At what stage, at the various stages, was there request for an extension of time? Was that in writing? Who considered it? What extensions of times were given? I'm very conscious of the woman who was murdered lately in Limerick, allegedly by a client. I'm very conscious of what I'm reading from the various reports and the amnesty. Just read for the amnesty. We live within a violence system, structural violence against sex workers in Ireland. It shows that the 2017 legislation has placed sex workers at higher risk of abuse and so on. I could quote other reports. So what I'm asking you is, how can you stand over the delay of almost over 3 years now in relation to a statutory obligation on something as serious as this? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister.
I can't stand over the delay. I'm not seeking to stand over the delay. I'm seeking to ensure that the report is progressed and finalised and published as an absolute matter of urgency. And I've acknowledged in this House my frustration that hasn't been the case, and I have outlined why. As you'll know, as Asking Court of the House, in oral PQs, what I say on the record of the House trumps any prepared material. So my answer is as my answer given in relation to this House, and obviously in full drive. I have a lot of material. I was making the point just that, and this is absolutely not to apportion blame to anybody, but the study lead for this report, when they were commissioned to do this piece of work, was then asked to also carry out the familicide review after the untimely passing of Nora Gibbons. She very kindly agreed to do that, put a huge amount of effort into that, and I'm hoping to be at a point, as I said to you earlier, in relation to bringing the familicide review forward and acting on recommendations. That did take this person's attention somewhat off this work. They're now back fully on it. And in addition to that, I am assured by them in person when I met them that it is nearing completion, and I am supplementing their efforts, should they wish to, in terms of Secretariat assistance to finalise.